pulled over, searched without cause and humiliated. But when her husband arrived, the real confrontation began. Angela Hayes adjusted the rear-view mirror of her silver sedan, the hum of the highway fading as she turned onto a quieter road in suburban Dallas. The evening air felt heavy, and her sequined gown shimmered faintly in the dim streetlights. She had just left a fundraiser event, a night spent supporting a local community center she deeply cared about. Angela was proud of the work they were doing, but more than anything, she was looking forward to getting home to her family. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was her husband, Malcolm Hayes, the newly appointed police commissioner of Dallas County. Angela smiled softly. "Be home soon," she murmured to herself, not bothering to pick up the call. Then, the flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror caught her attention. A police cruiser. Angela's brows furrowed as she slowed her car and pulled over to the side of the road. Her mind raced for a reason. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't rolled through any stop signs. She wasn't even on her phone. Maybe it's just a routine stop, she thought, rolling down her window as the officer approached. The officer, a tall man with a stern expression, didn't waste time. "License and registration," he said curtly. Angela handed over her documents without hesitation. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" The man glanced at her license before looking back at her, his tone clipped. "We got a call about a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity in the area." Angela's heart skipped a beat. "Suspicious activity," she repeated, her voice steady despite the unease creeping in. "Step out of the car, ma'am," the officer said, ignoring her question. Angela hesitated. "Excuse me. I'm not sure I understand." "Step out of the car now," he interrupted, his tone firmer. Another cruiser pulled up behind the first, and two more officers got out, their flashlights cutting through the dark. Angela's hand trembled as she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. She kept her hands visible, just as her husband had taught her. "I'm complying," she said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "But I'd like to know why I'm being treated this way." Her calm demeanor seemed to agitate the officers further. One began searching her car without asking permission, rifling through the back seat and trunk. The other two stood close, watching her every move. Angela's heart pounded. This wasn't right. She had nothing to hide, but the way they treated her, like she was guilty of something, was humiliating. But Angela wasn't the kind of woman to cower. "I'd like to call my husband," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. One officer scoffed. "You can do that after we're done here." Angela's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She didn't want to escalate the situation. Instead, she silently prayed that someone would intervene, that this would end before it spiraled further. But little did she know, the situation was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. Angela stood by her car, the cool night air brushing against her arms as she watched the officers rummage through her belongings. Her perfectly organized trunk, filled with boxes of brochures and event materials from the fundraiser, was being treated like a crime scene. They pulled out items, inspecting them as if they might uncover something sinister. One officer held up a stack of pamphlets. "What's all this for?" Angela's voice remained calm but firm. "I just left a fundraiser. Those are brochures for the community center we're supporting." He stared at her, his expression unreadable, before tossing the stack back into the trunk without a word. The second officer, a younger man with a nervous energy, approached her. "Ma'am, are there any weapons, drugs, or anything illegal in this vehicle?" "No, officer," Angela replied, her patience wearing thin. "I told you I've done nothing wrong. I'd appreciate if you could explain why I'm being treated this way." Her composure only seemed to irritate them more. "We're just doing our job," the older officer barked, slamming the trunk shut. Angela glanced at her phone, which was still on the passenger seat, buzzing again with an incoming call from Malcolm. "May I retrieve my phone to call my husband now?" she asked. The officers exchanged glances. "No sudden movements," one of them said, as if she were a threat. Angela fought the urge to roll her eyes but complied, carefully reaching into the car to grab her phone. The officers seemed almost disappointed when nothing about her behavior justified their suspicions. But they weren't done yet. "We're running your plates and license," one said, stepping away. Angela crossed her arms, watching as the second cruiser's spotlight illuminated her car. The scrutiny, the assumptions, the complete disregard for her dignity, it was infuriating. But she kept her cool, knowing that any sign of frustration could be twisted into a reason to escalate further. She dialed Malcolm's number with steady fingers. He picked up almost immediately. "Angela, are you okay? I've been calling—" She cut him off. "Malcolm, I'm pulled over by the police, and they're searching my car without cause. I need you here, now." Malcolm's tone shifted instantly, his voice filled with both concern and authority. "Where are you? I'm coming." Angela gave him her location, her voice faltering just slightly as the weight of the situation settled in. "Please hurry." As she ended the call, she noticed the officers watching her closely, their postures stiffening. They didn't know who she had called, but something about her confidence seemed to unnerve them. Minutes passed, each one feeling longer than the last. Angela remained silent, standing tall despite the humiliation. She noticed a few cars slowing down as they drove by, their occupants rubbernecking to see what was happening. And then she heard the sound of a car pulling up. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop nearby, and the driver's door opened. Malcolm stepped out, his tall frame exuding authority, his face a mask of restrained anger. But what happened next was something neither Angela nor the officers could have anticipated. Malcolm Hayes wasn't the type of man to lose his temper easily. Years of experience as a public servant and, most recently, the police commissioner had taught him the value of control, even in the most heated situations. But tonight, seeing his wife standing on the side of the road, surrounded by officers with a look of defiance masking her unease, something inside him burned. He stepped out of the SUV and closed the door firmly, the sound cutting through the tense air. The officers glanced at him, their guarded expressions betraying their surprise at his confident stride. Malcolm was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his police badge clipped to his belt and glinting under the streetlights. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I'm Malcolm Hayes, Dallas County Police Commissioner. Someone want to explain to me why my wife is being detained and her vehicle searched without cause?" The older officer, clearly the one in charge, straightened his posture but didn't quite meet Malcolm's eyes. "Sir, we're conducting an investigation. We received a report of suspicious activity involving a car matching this description." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Suspicious activity? In a sedan driven by a well-dressed woman coming from a charity event. You do realize you're speaking to Angela Hayes, my wife?" The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. The older officer cleared his throat. "We weren't aware of her identity, sir. We were just following protocol." "Protocol?" Malcolm repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Since when does protocol involve searching someone's car without their consent or probable cause? Did she give you permission to do this?" Silence. "That's what I thought," Malcolm said, taking a step closer. His presence was commanding, and the tension among the officers was palpable. Bystanders had started gathering, some holding up their phones to record. The flashing police lights bathed the scene in an eerie red and blue glow. Angela finally spoke, her voice steady. "Malcolm, they wouldn't even let me make a phone call at first. They've been treating me like a suspect from the moment they pulled me over." Malcolm turned to her, his expression softening for a brief moment before hardening again as he faced the officers. "Do you have any idea what kind of liability you're exposing this department to? You're harassing an innocent citizen, my wife no less, without justification. This isn't just unprofessional, it's unacceptable." One of the officers, clearly feeling the heat, stammered, We were just doing our job, sir. We didn't mean—" "You didn't mean?" Malcolm cut him off, his tone sharp. Your actions suggest otherwise. And those cameras, he said, gesturing to the growing number of bystanders recording the scene, will ensure there's no spinning this later. You're going to explain yourselves right here, right now. The officers exchanged nervous glances, clearly unsure how to proceed. The older officer stepped forward, attempting to regain control. Commissioner Hayes will need to de-escalate this situation. Perhaps we can discuss this back at the precinct. Malcolm let out a short, humorless laugh. De-escalate? You want to de-escalate now? After humiliating my wife and violating her rights? No, we're addressing this here. In public. Exactly where you created this mess. By now, the crowd had grown larger. People were murmuring, some expressing their disbelief at what they were witnessing. Angela stood quietly, her posture composed, but her eyes betraying her exhaustion. Call your supervisor, Malcolm ordered. Now. The older officer hesitated, but ultimately reached for his radio, his demeanor reluctantly compliant. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of accountability pressing down on the officers as they awaited their superior's arrival. But what happened when the supervisor arrived would turn this already tense situation into a breaking point for everyone involved. The faint crackle of the police radio broke through the tense silence as the older officer called for his supervisor. The minutes that followed felt like hours, with Malcolm standing his ground, Angela silently watching, and the crowd growing larger. Some bystanders murmured among themselves, while others whispered into their phones or live-streamed the scene. Finally, a black and white SUV pulled up, and out stepped Lieutenant Charles Donovan. His uniform was crisp, and his expression betrayed a mixture of annoyance and confusion as he approached the group. What's going on here? Donovan demanded, his eyes scanning the scene. He barely glanced at Angela before turning to Malcolm. Lieutenant Donovan, Malcolm said evenly, your officers here pulled over my wife, conducted an unwarranted search of her vehicle, and have failed to provide any legitimate reason for their actions. I'm waiting for an explanation. Donovan's eyes widened as the realization hit him. Commissioner Hayes. I didn't realize. That's the problem, Lieutenant, Malcolm interrupted, his voice steady but sharp. It shouldn't matter who she is. Every citizen deserves respect and fair treatment, and this is anything but. The lieutenant's face tightened as he turned to the officers. Is this true? Did you search her vehicle without cause? The older officer hesitated. We had a report about suspicious activity. Cut the excuses, Malcolm interjected, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. You had no cause. None. And now, not only have you harassed an innocent woman, but you've also put this entire department under scrutiny. Do you even understand the gravity of what you've done? Donovan rubbed his temple, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. Commissioner, I assure you, this will be investigated thoroughly. I'll handle it personally. Malcolm took a step forward, his voice unwavering. This isn't just about an investigation. It's about accountability. You don't get to sweep this under the rug, not this time. The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones capturing every word. Malcolm turned to them, addressing the bystanders directly. To everyone here, he said, raising his voice, this is the kind of behavior we've been fighting to eliminate in our police force. No one, no matter their status, their job, or their skin color, should have to endure this kind of treatment. This is why accountability matters. A smattering of applause rippled through the crowd. Angela watched her husband, pride flickering in her eyes despite the exhaustion she felt. Donovan looked increasingly uncomfortable. Commissioner, perhaps we can move this conversation somewhere private. No, Malcolm said firmly. Transparency happens here, in front of the people you serve. Your officers need to understand that there are consequences for their actions. If they don't, nothing will ever change. The officers shifted uncomfortably as Donovan struggled to respond. It was clear that the balance of power had shifted. and there was no escaping the consequences of what had unfolded. But the story didn't end there. The fallout from that night would spark a chain of events that no one, especially the officers involved, could have anticipated. The fallout from that night was swift and unrelenting. By the next morning, the video recordings of the confrontation had gone viral, shared across social media platforms with hashtags like #JusticeForAngela and #AccountabilityMatters. News outlets picked up the story, airing the footage alongside headlines questioning the integrity of the Dallas County Police Department. Angela and Malcolm sat side by side at their dining table, the morning light streaming through the windows. Angela, still tired from the night before, sipped her coffee while Malcolm scrolled through his phone, reading articles and comments. "They're calling it the Hayes incident," Malcolm said, his tone heavy. "I knew it would get attention, but it's bigger than I expected." Angela set her cup down and looked at him. "It's not about us, Malcolm. It's about what this represents. How many people go through this every day and don't have the platform we do? They deserve justice too." Malcolm nodded, his expression somber. "I've spent my entire career trying to root out this kind of behavior, and now it's clear there's so much more to do." Later that day, an emergency press conference was held. Malcolm stood at the podium, flanked by Angela and other members of the department's leadership team. His voice was calm but resolute as he addressed the crowd of reporters and community members. "What happened last night was unacceptable," he began. "The actions of those officers were not just a violation of policy but a betrayal of the trust that this community places in its police force. I want to be clear. This is not who we are, and this is not who we will be." He paused, letting his words sink in. "There will be a full and transparent investigation into the incident. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. But this isn't just about disciplinary action. It's about systemic change. We need to ask ourselves why incidents like this continue to happen and what we, as leaders and as a society, are going to do about it." The crowd erupted in applause, but Malcolm's face remained serious. He turned to Angela, who stepped forward to share her experience. "When I was pulled over last night," Angela began, her voice steady, "I felt powerless. I did everything right, followed every instruction, but it didn't matter. I wasn't seen as a person. I was seen as a problem to be dealt with. And I know I'm not alone in feeling that way." She took a deep breath before continuing. "But I also know that change is possible. It starts with accountability, with people speaking out, and with leaders like my husband who are willing to challenge the system from within. We have to do better, for everyone." In the days that followed, the department launched new training initiatives focused on de-escalation and implicit bias. A citizens' advisory board was formed to ensure transparency and accountability. Malcolm personally reached out to community leaders, promising to rebuild trust and make the changes that were long overdue. The officers involved in the incident faced disciplinary action, and one chose to resign. Their actions were a stark reminder of how deep systemic issues ran, but also how necessary it was to confront them head-on. As for Angela, she became an advocate for justice, using her platform to amplify the voices of those who couldn't speak for themselves. She often told her story, not out of anger, but out of hope. "It's not just about what happened to me," she'd say. "It's about what we do to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." In the end, the Hayes family turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead was long, but they faced it together, with courage, conviction, and an unwavering belief that a better world was possible. And that's the lesson we all need to take away. Real change starts with accountability and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. So ask yourself, what can you do to make a difference? Start today. Speak up. Push for change. Because every voice matters.